We are live. Okay. Welcome everyone to our Wednesday night class. It's an honor to be here. We have a beautiful Torah portion this week, Parashat Vayeshev. A lot goes on in the Torah portion. We obviously know we can't cover everything, but we are going to have two beautiful insights, one from the Zera Shimshon and the other from Rabbi Leib Heyman. So I'd like to thank tonight's sponsors. Again, we always like to thank our sponsors. This keeps our class able to continue and all of the rest of our efforts here in South Florida and worldwide going strong. So a big thank you to all our sponsors. And anyone watching on YouTube, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and like us, and that will help our YouTube channel grow even more. So thank you for that. Our first sponsor for tonight, a big mazel tov, is to David and Ingrid Ederi on the birth of their grandson. Big mazel tov. This is their first grandson after they've had a granddaughter. Mazel tov to their parents, Eliana and Merrick Sarur. And they also are sponsoring tonight's class in honor of their son Josh's bar mitzvah, which is this bar mitzvah parsha is Parashat Vayeshev. It's at least 10 years ago, but it is the anniversary of his bar mitzvah parsha. So thank you, big mazel tov, double mazel tov to the Ederi family. Next up, we have Mr. Joel Goldman, who's sponsoring tonight's class in honor of his children, Miriam Gisa and Shoshana Leah, that they should do well in school. One day have a good shidduch, amen. Last but not least is Susan Steinfeld, who is sponsoring tonight's class for the refuah shlema for her father, Yechezkel ben Chana. May he have a refuah shlema, and may all of the Torah study that we are studying tonight raise his health, his good spirit, and give him longevity and only good things for him and his entire family. Amen. So thank you for all that. This week, Parashat Vayeshev, we are transitioning. So let me preempt it as follows. If we look in the book of Genesis and we look at our three patriarchs, the vast majority of the attention coming in second place would be Abraham, and in first place would be Jacob. The most amount of Torah portions, the most amount of verses and episodes does take place for our patriarch Jacob, again because he had all 12 of his children on the path of God, and that was eventually going to be the forevermore people of Israel, Bnei Israel, the Jewish people. Having said that, in this week's Torah portion, we do transition a little bit from Jacob to learning about Joseph, his favorite son. So I want to give us a little bit of a recap on what's taken place over the past, let's say, 2 or 3 parshas, and bring us up to speed where we are up to today. This would help us tremendously appreciate the novelties that we're going to hear from the Zera Shimshon and then from Rabbi Leib. At age 63, a little bit advanced, especially for the shidduch scene nowadays. At age 63, Jacob takes the blessing from his father and finds his way away from home. He travels away from home. He leaves home as his mother, and then his father also blessed him to go. So he left at 63. He goes on and he's going to find a wife. However, he takes a 14-year stop, and he goes and he studies Torah at the great yeshiva of Shem and Ever, and that brings him to a ripe bachelor age of 77. 77 years old, he finds himself by his uncle's house, soon to be his father-in-law, and after a month, they strike a deal, and he starts working for 7 years for Rachel. We all know that was swapped, that was messed up, and he ends up having to work another 7 years for Rachel. So he worked for 14 years. That takes him to age 91. So now at age 91, he decides that now I got to start making a living for myself. Like the first 91 years of my life, I've been living off of my father, my father-in-law. I think at 91, we got to get our stuff together and get moving in life. So at 91, he works for himself, and he works 6 years. And Hashem showed him so much blessing during those 6 years, more than if any of us would have worked for 90 years straight. That's how much blessing Jacob found in his labor. And Joseph was born. This takes him to the age of 97. 97, he leaves his father-in-law's home, meets Esav. That was last week's Torah portion. And he lags, unfortunately, 2 years before coming home. And during those 2 years, that's when the unfortunate problem of Dinah took place, which we spent ample time on last week. And Rachel, unfortunately, passes away when Joseph was only 8 years old. It was pretty sad, while she was giving birth to Benjamin. And finally, at the age 99, Jacob finds his way home along with 12 of his sons, 1 daughter, and 3 out of 4 of his wives. So he comes home and he's 99 years old. This has been 36 years away from home. It's been a long, long time. Let's fast forward 9 years. Now Joseph is 17, and this is when this week's Torah portion takes place. The Torah portion starts at Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megorei aviv be'eretz Canaan, that Jacob comes and he settles in his father's land, long back with his father. Now he's 99 years old. Seems like he should be able to settle, but no. Pretty soon after, and it took a couple years, but finally this unfortunately happened. Joseph, at 17 years old, leaves his father's tent, where he was full-time studying Torah from his father and from his grandfather Isaac. He leaves for the first time, and he commits 2 mistakes. And these mistakes are very, very severe. And they're so severe that they had tremendous amount of ramifications that we're going to learn that till this day are unfortunately a serious thing. So what happens is, and this is all drawn out through the Talmud and from other sources, obviously, the first sin that he does, I also saw this in the Mam Loez. I know many of you know that I'm a big fan of the Mam Loez. So the Mam Loez says these are the 2 sins that he did. The first is that he pampered himself. He came out and he started fixing his hair and trying to over-beautify himself. Again, judged at his level, he was putting too much emphasis on that. And because of that, he was punished. He was, as the Mefarshim, as the commentaries explain, he was welcoming the evil inclination to come and start up with him. And that did cause him a trouble. It was something immature, even at a young age of 17, for Joseph to be engaged in and trying to beautify himself. Now, even though the Mamlo says Joseph did it all l'shem shamayim, for the sake of Hashem, nevertheless, right, because a Torah scholar who learns Torah and represents Torah has to always be neat and clean and presentable. But at Joseph's high level, explains the Mamlo, he unfortunately spent way too much attention on the way he looked. That was the first mistake he did. He pampered himself. The second, which is the more common one, is that he unfortunately slandered his brothers. He spoke evil about his brothers, specifically to his father. And what Joseph would do is he would hang out with his brothers, with his half-brothers from the children of the slaves of Bilhah and Zilpah, and he saw that the children of Leah were mistreating these slaves' children. And he disagreed with that. He said that there's no difference. We all have the same father. There should be no differentiation between one another. Now, Joseph had all the right to be different. He was the son of the favored wife. And still, he disagreed with this misconduct and the mistreating their other brothers. And then he went and he told, so he saw that, and he went and he told his father 3 things. Now, listen closely to these 3 things, because this is what we're going to build the Zera Shimshon on these 3 primary things. The first thing that he would come and tell his father is that my brothers are eating, as we say in Hebrew, ever min hachai, eating an animal, a piece of an animal, limb of an animal, of a live animal. Meaning, is a Torah obligation to properly slaughter an animal before consuming it, along many other important guidelines and laws. But one of them is that the animal has to be slaughtered and dead. So Joseph came and told his father that I saw my brothers eating a limb off a live animal. That's number one. The second thing that he told him is Abba, my brothers are mistreating the children of the maidservants. And the third is Abba, my brothers are involved in promiscuity. They're involved in, as we say in Hebrew, arayot. They were having inappropriate dealings, to say the least, this is what he said, with the opposite gender. And these are the three things he would come and say. So before now and coming to understand where Joseph is coming from, what was exactly the tribes doing? We know that all of these tribes, we're talking about the 10 brothers of Joseph, besides Benjamin. What were they doing? How can they justify their case to prove that they didn't do anything wrong? So the Mamluas goes through one by one, all three of these things, to prove how Joseph was indeed mistaken. The first is he says that, yes, the brothers knew the law. And again, even though this is before the Torah was given, they did apply and they did do everything they knew through prophecy, what the Torah says, that what the brothers would do is they would slaughter the animal, and while the animal is still twitching, they would cut a limb off and they would eat it, which technically is permitted if done properly. And therefore, they said, this is considered nutritious, it's considered healthy, we are going to do it in this way. Joseph didn't say that. Joseph said, no, it's still prohibited to do such a thing. The animal has to be fully dead. You cannot be twitching it at all, because he said that we have a law of a ben Noach, which is a Noachide law, that the animal has to be completely dead before eaten. And this was the debate between the two. Another alternative answer is he said, okay, maybe it was a case of ben Pakua, which we all know. We're not going to get too much into it. That's when a baby is found in a slaughtered mother's stomach, if the animal needs to be slaughtered or not before eaten. All of these different reasons, but nevertheless, the Mamluah says that Yosef was unfortunately mistaken, and therefore he slandered his brothers to his father. That's number one. The second is that the sons of the slaves were mistreated, but they had a reason, because the brothers held that even though their mothers were freed before Jacob married them, nevertheless, they are not the same stature. They do not have the same status as the brothers, as the rest of the brothers, and that's why they mistreated them. And the third reason that which they dealt with women in an improper way was because the brothers conducted business. There were women that they sometimes had to deal with in business, and the brothers obviously didn't do anything wrong, but Joseph suspected them, again, because Joseph was a young boy. He was just in his tent. He knew nothing better. But unfortunately, since he suspected them and they obviously didn't do anything wrong, he was again wrong for that. So that was the flip side to Joseph's claims. Now, what happened to Joseph? So Joseph was punished measure for measure in a very strong way. Again, he was judged on a very high level because of who he was. And for the fact that he claimed that the brothers were eating from a live animal, well, when the brothers sold him, they slaughtered a goat, and they dipped Joseph's beautiful cloak into the garment, and that was a punishment measure for measure to Joseph for speaking negatively about them. The second is that he said that the slaves were being mistreated. Joseph himself was sold as a slave. And the third is that he said that they were promiscuous and committing inappropriate relationships with women, and he had the great test of Potiphar's wife, which we'll speak more about, but that was his punishment for it. So those are the three. Again, those are the three that Rashi says. They tit for tat. For Ever Minachai, his coat was dipped in blood. For making fun of for saying that the brothers making fun of the slaves, he became a slave. For saying that they committed adultery, well, he had that test of adultery with the wife of Potiphar. Now the Zera Shimshon asks a question. He analyzes all three of these reports that Joseph is bringing and the punishments that come along with it, and he says, okay, I understand the second claim, the fact that he said that he was making fun of the slaves, and then he was sold as a slave. Okay, that makes sense. That sounds like midah keneged midah, measure for measure. But the other ones, the fact that Joseph's coat was put into a goat's blood, how is that a punishment to Joseph? And furthermore, how is Potiphar's wife enticing Joseph a punishment? On the contrary, that episode led him to go to jail, which may not have seemed so great, but that was an opportunity for Joseph to be showcased and brought in front of Pharaoh, which led him to become the interpreter of Pharaoh's dreams and then eventually the viceroy. So the Zera Shimshon says one of these three seems definitely like a punishment. The fact that he was sold like a slave. But the other two don't really seem that much of a punishment. Dipping blood dipping his coat in the blood coat doesn't seem like a punishment. And the fact that his master's wife enticed him also did not seem like a punishment. So listen to the Zera Shimshon answers beautifully. On the concept of Joseph's coat being dipped in blood, he says the Sefer HaChinuch teaches us that the reason that eating from a live animal is prohibited is because that shows that demonstrates a character of being bloodthirsty and heartless, unfortunately, which is opposite of the Jewish behavior, says the Sefer HaChinuch. So with that, the Zera Shimshon says Joseph told his father that they hate him, that the brothers dislike him. Why? Because he's coming and he's tattletaling on them that they're eating from live animals. Not that Joseph did anything wrong. Meaning, Joseph thought that maybe his father would start hating him or disliking him the way the brothers disliked him because of something wrong that he did. But he said, Abba, I didn't do anything wrong. The brothers just dislike me because they're eating from a live animal. So that's why Joseph rationalized to tell this to his father. However, you know what the Shvatim, what the tribes, what his brothers wanted to prove? They wanted to prove to Joseph that they are not bloodthirsty, they're not heartless, and they're not cruel. Because they never, ever ate from a limb of a live animal. Rather, they proved to him that they decided to sell him as a slave opposed to killing him. If they were heartless and cruel, they would have just killed him. On the contrary, they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to dip your coat into the goat's blood, proving that they slaughtered the goat. And then they dipped the coat in, proving to him, we always slaughter our animals before we eat them. And this is a proof. And this has one to do with another because goat blood is similar to human blood. And they're saying, we really should have slaughtered you. But we're not cruel, we're not heartless. So we are slaughtering this animal instead of slaughtering you, dipping your coat into it. So how does this answer as a punishment for Joseph, says Zera Shimshon? This answers that Joseph was now being punished because he became aware that he was wrong. That's what the Zera Shimshon says. The fact that he now becomes aware that they are not heartless, rather they are merciful, they're compassionate, that is a proof that he was wrong and that he spoke Lashon Hara. That is a punishment. That's what the Zera Shimshon says. The Siftei Chacham says another reason, which is quite fascinating in and of its own right. The Siftei Chacham, another commentary on our Torah, says that from the fact that Joseph knew that his coat was dipped in the blood, that would make Jacob assume that his son is dead. And we know that there is a prohibition of praying for something which is impossible. You're not allowed to pray for someone who passed away to come back to life because it's not happening. Not by us, not in our lifetime. So this was a punishment to Joseph because he knew his father would not pray for him because he thought he was dead. And that's how the dipping of the coat in the goat's blood became a punishment. Okay, so then the second reason of making fun of that the brothers are making fun, mistreating the slave children, that we understood as a punishment because Joseph was sold as a slave. But the third, the fact that he claimed that they were committing adultery and other types of promiscuity, how was that a punishment that Potiphar's wife came and enticed Jacob? So to that, the Zera Shimshon gives 4 reasons how that was not really a win-win for Joseph, how he unfortunately lost a lot from that interaction. Number one is he did commit a sin, even though they did not have a full-out sin, but the fact that he was in the bed with her, that in itself was something inappropriate and wrong, especially at Joseph's level. So that was one problem. Second problem, which also was a sin on or a punishment on Joseph's end, was the fact that he was completely embarrassed. She started screaming and lying about him, and that embarrassment it resulted in Joseph being embarrassed, and resulted and was a part of his punishment. Next is he ended up sitting in jail for this incident. So how could you say this is not a punishment? Yes, of course, there was some light at the end of the tunnel, but he was definitely punished for it. And third is that because, and we've spoken about this before, that Joseph only had 2 children. And the reason why he only had 2 children is because he was really supposed to have 10. And because he was in bed with the wife of Potiphar, even though they did not commit any physical sin, nevertheless, Joseph lost the opportunity to bring all 12 of his children into this world, and he only had 2 out of the 12 children he was supposed to have. Ironically, Benjamin has 10 children, but Joseph only had 2. Joseph was supposed to have all 12 children. That's not to say that Benjamin shouldn't have had his own children, but Joseph only had 2 children. And the reason was because at the end of the day, I've spoken about this before. It's a little bit sensitive. Don't take it too literal. It's a very high level, but I'll share it anyways. Is that Joseph was aroused by Eshet Potiphar, by the wife of Potiphar. Again, he was a young man, and that's 17 years old. It's just a normal thing. However, Joseph was always very careful to guard his brit milah. Now, having said that, after he was aroused, the Talmud says that he jumped out of the bed and he dug his 10 fingers into the ground, into the sand, and there was a speck of semen that came out of each of his fingers through his fingernails that went into the ground in order that he would still be guarding his brit milah. Understood? So those 10 specks of semen that came out of his fingernails, those were his 10 children that he did not have, and he only had 2 children. Okay? Nevertheless, the point that I didn't mean to spook you at all, but the point of that is that, in essence, this was a punishment, and it was a measure for measure to Joseph for speaking negatively about his brothers to his father. So with this, we're going to end the Zera Shimshon with a lesson that I thought of. Obviously, number one lesson that we can learn about Joseph speaking the slander to his brothers is that we have to be very careful with lashon hara, very careful with our speech, what we say. There's plenty. I always speak about this. There's plenty of books, tapes, classes, groups that there are to join and to be involved with, and on the learning schedule to guard ourselves from, unfortunately speaking, things which are inappropriate and slanderous, God forbid, and the tremendous repercussions that they have. So that's the first. The second is the idea of measure for measure, that we always believe in the idea of midah keneged midah, but we have to understand that midah keneged midah works for the positive and unfortunately as well for the negative. So may we always be looked upon in the positive light by God, judged upon in a positive way, and that we have to understand that what we do to others and how we treat others is the way others, and most importantly, God, will reciprocate towards us.